Hi, Maryam.
Hello, Candice.
Thank you so much for joining COLLAF Conversations.
Welcome.
So I know that you're working currently on a really exciting project.
Yes.
Can we delve into that?
Absolutely. There's a wonderful project, which is actually a dual project. It's an exhibition, which is called The New American West, Photography and Conversation, and its associated book, West-West, Twin Perspectives of the American West. The way this came about was really quite happenstance and very organic. I met my best friend from high school in Paris days after 38 years of absence. And it was through a high school reunion, believe it or not. And not a physical reunion, it was a WhatsApp chat, if you can imagine. And this random number tags me. And I'm like, I can't even imagine. I said, who is this? And he goes, Alexis Ribou. I said, my goodness, where have you been? Anyway, it turns out that, we ended up meeting, of course, goes without saying, he lives in Paris. And it was just like old days. And it so happens that he's a photographer. And it so happens that he loves the American West. So it was a bit of a completely on the spot, a crazy, mad idea that we had about taking off to the American West and doing a photo project together.
Wow.
A conversation, a visual dialogue, effectively, which we did in March of 24. And we spent about 25 days on the road. We went through 4 states, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, and capturing the everyday space, place, people, psychology of place, and exploring really big ideas, big art, big ideas, big nature, looking at the origins and the history of places like Marfa, and going to incredibly spiritual locations like White Sands National Park, for instance, or looking at the hand of man, interfering with nature, like places like Los Alamos, and just being taken by the beauty of space and big sky. It was one of the most cathartic experiences of my life. But the philosophy or the end game or the end morale, I guess, of this project, really, when you look at it now, in retrospect, is how one journey, one road trip, effectively, could have been viewed so differently by 2 different people. One road, 2 gaze, 2 lens, 2 perspectives, and so different, both aesthetically and content-wise. The project was picked up by Carrie Scott, who's a wonderful art historian based in London, and Howard Greenberg, who's the wonderful gallerist, the guru of photography in America, really. And this was just by us posting a few images on Instagram, and it just caught their attention. And next thing you know, we're off on this wonderful voyage of, a book, an exhibition, which opens on June 11th. At Pierre Jovanovic Mobilier in New York. Pierre is an incredible interior star architect in his own right. He has this beautiful, beautiful 10,000 square foot space in New York City, in Chelsea. And we've been talking for a while about having a joint project, and this was the perfect project. So he's given us this platform, and it's this absolute beautiful congruence of different fields coming together, these different worlds coming together, the worlds of design, the worlds of art, the world of photography, and it's just a perfect match, really. It's a perfect storm in a way.
It feels very meant to be.
It really
is.
It's
amazing.
Yeah.
Why the West?
It has it's always had this mythical connotation.
Definitely.
Whether it's in songs. Personally, I can only speak for myself because my chord is not here at the moment. I love country music. I love Western. I love, things vintage, songs. I was just listening to the Eagles this morning. It's everything to do with openness and freedom. Those are the types of, immediate associations that come to mind. Of course, the West has evolved, And you look at also the old films, of course, goes without saying, you know, I grew up with spaghetti westerns, and you know, Francis Lai and Ennio Morricone and those types of, you know, musical scores that went with it. And it's just, it has this mythical, magical, fairy tale-ish land of possibility, land of opportunity kind of, you know, connotations, which of course has evolved. And the show is even more layered because Howard has given us this incredible opportunity to be placed in dialogue with some of the great iconic photographers of the past, the estates of which he has himself, he owns and has access to, obviously, but some great names, you know, people like Ansel Adams and Diane Arbus and Edward Weston, Edward Bertinsky, you know, who's current.
Amazing, yeah.
I mean, really, really big names. So it's a true privilege to have that opportunity also to be in dialogue with those types of artists, the past and the present, and different gazes, American, non-American, female, male. So it's a nice soup that we've created, and hopefully it can entice, you know, the viewer into a new form of perspective on that part of the world and make them dream. Ultimately, you know, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to photography, it's really about the feelings that are evoked in an image. And I just hope that whoever will see all these images, mine and my colleague, and of course the historic works, that it just does something to you on an emotional level. So I'm very excited.
For sure. How much do you work together in capturing shots? Would you go for the same type of shots but in a different angle, or was it very much like you would suddenly be interested in something and he was interested in something else?
It's an excellent question, which is actually a very, very big part of this project. We agreed from day one, it was some sort of unspoken handshake, if you may, that we would not share our photographs along the way. Wow. And believe you me, in those 20 some odd days that we were on the road, we found out, obviously, post factum, we each took more than 8,000 photographs each.
Wow.
So the editing job was, as you can imagine, just horrendous, horrendous. We each brought them down to about 500 photos each, at which point then the curator steps in, and that's when our wonderful Carrie Scott came in and sort of really cleaned it up. But nice. We never ever shared. And I remember very distinctly arriving the first day, you know, the first day we photographed was in downtown El Paso, in a place called Segundo Barrio, which is, you know, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the whole of America, actually. And we were walking these streets, and I've never done this before. You know, I've never really done photojournalistic work before. My whole focus has been so geared towards, you know, the Sublime Feminine. I've always had a model, a dancer. Usually I work with dancers, focusing on figurative type work or stories around women with a capital W.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very different type of work that I was engaged in. Because I just was thrown out there, you know, into space, and somebody said, photograph. And I was literally stuck by Alexi's side, at which point he said, you know, like literally, like, what are you doing? Get out of here, you know, go left, I'm going right. I'll see you in 30 minutes. So that was a good wake-up call. I stood there on the corner of the street. I'll never forget. It's desolate. It was like some sort of wind. It was a bit like Western, you know, it literally was like, I promise you, there was some plastic bags, like literally like floating in the air. I'm looking left and right, wondering, what on earth am I doing here? Of all places. So, you know, and I looked to my left, and he was already walking, you know, pretty far, and I was scared. I mean, honestly, it was, you know, there was a fear thing going on. I'm not going to lie about it.
Definitely.
But, you know, then you sort of regroup, you recenter, and you start looking. And that's when the eye really comes in, and you start really paying attention to things. And I started looking at these buildings and the culture behind it, and, you know, the signage, Spanish, you know, big language, of course, in El Paso. It's a border town with Mexico, so it goes without say, you know, we're literally on the border there. So, and the whole integration of culture, you know, Mexican culture, into the space as well. Some incredible wedding. I'll never forget the first shot I took was actually of this wedding store, but wedding gowns effectively, but done in that very effervescent,
Yes.
layered, almost like Barbie-like, fluorescent colors and pop colors. It was kind of wild actually. And I got into it. I let myself sort of slip into the mode and into the space and started walking the streets and noticing things. And then we sort of regrouped, after about half an hour or so. And then that's when I sort of started feeling really good. But it took a solid 48 hours for me to really get into that frame of mind, 100%. And it was a zone. And speaking of zone, the whole trip was a zone, actually, because when you're away from your day-to-day, when you're away from the urban, and you're away from your day-to-day, which, in his case is Paris, in my case is London, and your day-to-day routine and responsibilities and bills and family and all that kind of stuff, it's incredible how much you can achieve in one day, creatively speaking.
Absolutely.
Because you're so focused on the job, you're so focused on your ultimate objective. We didn't have a particular objective in mind, except for capturing the crack on the street. I mean, literally, as I remember going down one of the highways in Texas, one of these side routes, Route 90, if I'm not mistaken, pretty close to Marfa, Texas. And I saw this massive crack, on the road. And it was symbolic of so many things, gap, crack, society.
Yeah.
Not actually only American society, just the world, the way it's just becoming a very divided world. And things started taking on truly symbolic kind of significance on many levels. And so I was like, stop the car. Like, I was like, and he's like, what do you want to take? I said, the crack on the road. He's like, are you nuts? I'm like, no. And there were moments like that. Another wonderful time of dialogue, actually, in terms of the action prior to taking the photograph, was we were going down this straight road in New Mexico to Ghost Ranch, to George O'Keeffe's studio and home and all of that. It's just one straight road. And from a place called Española. So between Española and Ghost Ranch, it's one straight road. And we did something like, 10 U-turns, 15 U-turns, because I would see something on the opposite side. He would see something on the opposite side. And we both looked at each other. Should we? Yes. So, go do the U-turn, take the shot. But in terms of taking the shot, never the same shot. Really, same space, same sort of general environment, but it was never the same shot. Although, funnily enough, when we came back and eventually Carrie did her, wonderful curation of the photographs, you can see certain things that are picked up by one and the other. So if I take, for instance, a frontal shot of a derelict gas station, you will find a sign from that gas station in another photograph by Alexi, but on a very different scale,
completely different angle,
and a different angle, a different perspective, in completely different significance as well. So it's a fascinating exercise, actually.
Completely.
And also, generally speaking, photographers tend to be a little bit selfish, a little bit self-involved. This dialogue work is not necessarily something that one engages in necessarily. But somehow I think this whole thing was just based on trust and friendship, and we knew each other so well in the past, and there was a wonderful symbiotic, relationship that was going on of true friendship and true trust. So we kind of let ourselves be taken by that and perform very individually and very differently, but same journey. So
you obviously hadn't seen each other in a very long time.
Yeah.
You decide to do this journey where you're seeing the same things, but taking it from completely different shots, clearly.
Exactly.
And it's actually quite a vulnerable thing to do.
Of course. When we were on the trip, honestly, we never, ever imagined that it would turn into the project that it's turned into, which is wonderful. Traveling show is going to go to several cities globally as well, museums including, and it's definitely a vulnerable place. But the joke we had between us was, well, you know what? We're never too far from an airport.
It's true.
So if things didn't work out, there's always a flight out.
No, it's really true.
So, you know, that's the beauty of contemporary lives.
Do you think the photographs would have been different had you known at the beginning that they would be shown?
I think the pressure would have been on.
Yes.
And I think that part of the joy and the pleasure
100%.
that we both experienced through this trip, and I can't allow myself to speak for Alexi on this one, was the fact that there was no pressure. There was no commercial pressure. There was no gallery pressure. There really wasn't any expectation of an audience necessarily. We were doing this quite selfishly for ourselves, I think. I think that's kind of, you know, how we took off. It was a very self-serving exercise, also from a soulful perspective, you know, to be out there. You know, there's something very special out in the desert.
Definitely.
When you're out there, when you are for hours and on end. I kid you not. There were moments, days where we would drive for 2-3 hours and we wouldn't see a soul in sight, which in itself is actually makes you very vulnerable.
Yes.
And, you know, and we're not used to that kind of, obviously, we live in London, Paris.
Absolutely.
You know, the desert is a very different thing. But you are taken by this sort of big nature. And you can call that, you know, nature, you can call it higher energy, you can call it whatever it is. The light is unique, you know, as a photographer, but also just from a, again, I go back to the energy and the spiritual side of things. You're sort of uprooted from your everyday. So it just was an amazing experience. And without having that pressure, made it even more amazing.
100%.
Of course, we're beyond delighted. We realize our privilege of having this project being picked up by incredible names and the opportunity to show and share now, you know. But I have to tell you that every image, and again, I can, on this one, I'm speaking for myself, every time I look at an image in the book, and there are, you know, massive chunky book, basically, a book of 200 images of his, 200 of mine, book of essays by Carrie and Howard. Every image has a memory associated with it. And there are moments where I can just literally close my eyes and remember the moment and the feeling associated with that moment. And it just made it so special. It really, really did. It's something, it's a trip that I for sure will forever hold, you know, in my soul, my heart, my brain. It was just an incredible, it was just one of those incredible moments in life. And, you know, we all have them. This has been a portal to better things as well. Even from a career perspective, it's kind of been a portal to new possibilities, new opportunities, and also being able to share to a far wider audience than I personally have in the past. So I feel very humbled, really, by the experience and by the opportunity that it's afforded me, really. So
amazing. I want to go back to the very start.
Yep.
When did you actually first start being interested in art? Was it something you grew up with?
From a very early age, yes. My mother was really into art. And when we first moved to Paris, when I was 10 years old, from Iran, because of the revolution and all the, you know, change that took place in our lives, the life of the family, the one sort of place of solace, I guess, really, the only way I could sort of think about it now in retrospect, was weekends going to museums and art galleries. That's the beauty of growing up in a country like France, obviously, where you're completely taken by culture and possibilities and opportunities. As far as I'm personally concerned, I remember certain shows. You know, there was a fantastic Modigliani show that I saw at the Musée d'Art Moderne. I remember incredible Man Ray show, photographically speaking, at the Beaubourg, which was incredible. So certain things really are ingrained in my head and my memory. But honestly, being a child of a revolution, I kind of never really allowed myself to think that I could take on an artistic route, career-wise or educationally speaking. I had a father who was very focused on education. He was very educated himself. And that was actually one of the main reasons why we left Iran, you know, his choice of, making sure that my brother and and I would not be interrupted in the quality of our education. So, by the same token, our lives had changed. So I remember my father very distinctly telling me all along, "You are going to be a tax lawyer. You're going to be a banker or a doctor." So those were kind of the choices that were offered, and
Sure.
I was so sort of brainwashed with
Yes.
that eventually down the line, I went to Wellesley College. If you can imagine, Wellesley actually graduates the largest number of women curators in the whole of the United States.
Wow.
And it has the most incredible art history program. And yet, sadly for me, because I just had these echoes of these words by my father in my head, I kind of didn't even take one single art history course, which is a disaster. So I was really focused on, maths and don't even political science. I graduated with a political science degree, eventually made it to New York, did 2 years of banking in the 80s, investment banking, horror of all horrors, clearly not my thing. Then I went to business school, if you can imagine, at Columbia, which I think that the only benefit in retrospect of my business school days was some sort of, clear organization of things and matters in my head. I guess it gave me a form of professional discipline. And I studied marketing and eventually ended up, as a career for about 10 years. I was between L'Oreal and Estee Lauder. I was doing brand management. I was finally in a creative environment.
Yes.
Couldn't care less about the business side of things, which of course were a very large part of my responsibilities. But really all I was interested in was the development of ads, the visual creation of need in a woman, beauty on the surface, sadly not so much from inside, because that's just the nature of the beast in that industry. But it definitely crystallized that first image making thing in my head.
You clearly had a very visual mind.
Totally.
Yes.
And I think a lot of what I learned in marketing, I now apply to my own photography today, because I think that, anybody can be a wonderful photographer, but if it's not packaged in the right way, if it's not marketed as a story, as an aspirational story, whether good or bad, by the way, single shots here and there don't do the job. People need to believe in something. People need to buy into something. And I think that's where my marketing skills come in, to play.
That's really interesting, because I was going to ask you actually, sort of as an artist, how you balance that kind of commercial pursuit with also, wanting to create something that you really believe in and love.
Correct.
And I suppose that kind of answers the question, but I think that's so interesting that you can use that skill of marketing to then actually enhance what you want to create.
Correct. I'm always very organic to start. Yes. When I start a series, it's super organic. It always starts with literally, I kid you not, either a line of poetry, a scene in a movie, a piece of literature, an idea or concept, that it lies somewhere in the back of my mind. So that's how the idea starts. Even when I'm shooting, I don't over prepare. I have an idea of how or what I want to photograph, but it's never to the point of, I never write scripts or barely ever do mood boards, honestly. Yeah. I have a few ideas, images, stills in my head, but that's about the extent of, how I do things. And when I'm actually in the shoot, I don't use tripods. I don't try not to use artificial lighting. Because I move around a lot, and I invite natural light, and I invite grain, because what I do, or the way I view my own photography, and I can only speak about my own photography. I'm not a technical photographer. I'm not about precision photography. I'm about a feeling-based image. I'm essentially kind of what I'm doing is transposing my own feelings, my own sentiments, of that moment, that split second, eventually onto paper, and hope that whoever's looking at this, or the viewer, can have a sense of that feeling that I had at the time. So there's that kind of dialogue going on. But as far as the commerce side and the marketing side, yes, it's kind of compartmentalized in a little cell in the back of my brain,
yes,
which then comes out once the series is done. And that's where I can apply some of those skills, more business orientated, more commercially led. And of course, I drive my galleries nuts, because literally nuts through activations. I'm a great believer in activate. I mean, if you're given an opportunity in a gallery space to show your work and to share your work, it's about that, right? It's about showing and sharing your work. You're not talking to the gallerist or the gallery manager. You're talking to the audience who's. So I'm a great believer in activations and bringing in different audiences, young, old, seasoned, not seasoned, people who are collectors, people who are frankly afraid of putting their first step into, a gallery space. It can be a very daunting experience. But I like the idea of democratizing art. I like the idea of giving access to everyone. So, and I'm willing to give my time in terms of talking about it to people, talking about my work and so forth. So, so I would expect the same of the gallery owner to kind of, be by my side and afford those types of opportunities. I mean, a few croissants and coffees here and there are not going to make a difference to the bottom line. But I do drive him nuts, because it's constantly, the space when I do shows is constantly activated and populated.
It's super important.
Yes.
I mean, it's funny what you were saying about democratizing the art world, because that's kind of what I'm trying to do here, even in these conversations, is letting people listen in to these fascinating conversations that they might not be able to generally in everyday life.
Exactly.
But also what you were saying about like articulating your work and making sure people really understand it is something I actually discussed with Andrew Renton a few weeks ago.
Okay.
And he was saying that, as a professor at art school, he's not going to teach someone to be a great artist, but what he can do is teach them to articulate their art, and that will make them go further. And it's so important when you go to a gallery to ask the person behind the desk, show me what this is about. I need to understand it, because otherwise you're looking at a canvas, you don't actually know what was going through the artist's mind at the time or any context around it.
Exactly.
It's like as fundamental as the work itself.
Absolutely. I think to answer your statement, I think your initial contact with the artwork has a feeling-based impact on you, on your emotions. And if that impact is a positive experience, by the way, the positive experience can be negative in itself. So it can actually, you can look at a picture or a painting or sculpture, it can actually either repulse you, which is a positive thing for me, because it's actually doing something with you, or it can really attract you and sort of elevate your feelings and your mood and everything. Whatever the case be, I think it's at that stage, once you've had that feeling, that you can actually then go and ask more about that piece, because you've been touched by this. It's a magical moment for both the viewer and the artist. If that happens, that's kind of what, of course, every artist seeks.
I never thought about it like that, but I suppose for an artist, the worst thing in the world, they'd rather have someone say, "Oh my God, I don't like that," than have someone just walk past it.
The worst thing in the world, in life in general, I always say this, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in your work as an artist, is indifference.
Yes.
Indifference is just the most condescending, the most horrendous feeling that you can experience. As a woman, I speak about that, whether you're in a relationship with somebody who just doesn't care, or whether you are showing a part of you in this photograph. You're being super vulnerable by actually sharing your inner psyche, really. Your inner soul is what you're showing. And if somebody doesn't take interest or just walks by or, kind of boos it, it's difficult.
I know you're a writer as well.
Yes.
What do you find more vulnerable, photographs or writing?
Both really. And it really goes hand in hand. If I could say so, I think that my photographs are a little bit my visual love language. I think that's how I would kind of, describe them. And often especially sort of in the marketing side of things on my Instagram, for instance, I do associate words with imagery. And I like writing poetry. I'm much more at ease with the visual. That's something that comes much more easily to me. I need to be in a special zone. Not always great, by the way, when I write. I can also be, mood-wise. Often, I think probably my best writing, I've written a few poems in my life and so forth, are either in states of extreme ecstasy or in states of kind of, I wouldn't say depression, but
No,
down
nice.
mood.
Yeah.
Down mood. Yeah.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I know your photography tends to focus, because we kind of just touched on this before, around like femininity
Yes.
and power of
Yes.
the woman.
Yes.
Where did that come from? How does that personally resonate with you?
I think, as a woman, I greatly believe in women. I also greatly believe in men, by the way.
Mhm.
I'm actually, even though I could say I'm a feminist, I'm an egalitarian. I think every human needs to be viewed for their worth. Genuinely, I'm a great believer in that. So when we exaggerate on the front of feminism and so forth, it's kind of not my language necessarily. I love working with men. I love some of my best friends are men. And I think you can be a feminist and really embrace at the same time your sensuality and your sexuality. It's not things that are taboo. It should not, basically. But when I put a woman with a capital W on a pedestal, it's because she's all power. She's Mother Nature. She's creation with a capital C. She's possibility. She's potential. She's intellect. And she's beauty as well. And beauty is something that actually plays a big role in my work. I don't ever stay shy of beauty. And I know that sometimes in the art world, it's a bit of a boo-boo topic,
Yeah.
it's taboo. Sometimes beautiful things don't deserve their space in our contemporary art world. And I vehemently oppose that.
I agree.
I love producing beautiful things, or what I think is beautiful necessarily, and I love living with beautiful things. And also, I think one needs to distinguish between the private and the institutional. I like living with beautiful things in my home. At the same time, I appreciate institutional shows, and I really, really love, going, seeing, engaging with these shows intellectually, learning from them, etc., etc. And sometimes those pieces are not necessarily beautiful. They're a little bit more complex. And that's great from an intellectual perspective. But I think you need a bit of everything in your life, to be honest. The mix is important.
Yeah.
So.
Was there a particular series that you did that resonated with you more?
I loved working on a project which I shot in my favorite city in the world, Arles, in Provence.
Yes.
And it was a very special moment where I was given the wonderful opportunity to photograph a series in the Norpinus Hotel, which is, an iconic location in the heart of the town, which, historically speaking, is an old Roman town. It's also had this incredible relationship with the art world. Van Gogh, of course, spent time there. There's a very, photographically speaking, Lindbergh spent a lot of time there. And classically, for me in particular, growing up in France and being completely absorbed by French culture, there was this one image of that Helmut Newton took of Charlotte Rampling in '72, where she's sitting nude on a desk with this wonderful mirror behind her, holding a glass, an empty glass, and it was shot in suite number 10 of this hotel, the Norpinus. And that's an image which has always lingered, and I always think that actually Helmut Newton, he's very debated in the manner in which he represents women photographically. I actually think he elevates women. He always shows them powerfully. He always shoots from below. So it's these, giant, sort of very strong women standing very firm on the ground and very sure of their sensuality and sexuality. So I have a very positive view on his work. And so to have had the opportunity to stand where he stood and do my own perspective or shoot my own perspective on the subject it was both scary and thrilling at the same time. At the same time, the city of Arles it has these dual tensions, very feminine, but also extremely masculine, because it's a city where there's bullfighting and the Roman Arena is there. And it was only because the whole series was shot in October of 21, which was still in the midst of COVID,
Yes.
that we were given an opportunity to shoot in the arena, because we wanted to extend the story beyond the hotel and bring in some of the city and the city's history into the series. So it was a really amazing moment to have that opportunity to have this iconic space all to myself. So, yeah.
You obviously became a photographer. When would you say you started?
I started when I was 10.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I even my college essays, looking back, and I found them, I had in fact forgotten that the main essay for my universities in America were about the love of photography. And my father always said, you know, whatever happened to this love of photography? I said, well, life happened, a revolution happened, as you know. So, but when I got married, and this was back in 1998, I and had children, had time on my hand. I stopped my corporate work with Lauder and decided that perhaps this was a good moment to take workshops. So for about 10 years, as my kids were growing up, both of them, I have a son and a daughter, in my spare time, and one could wonder whether one has spare time as a mother, but you know, you make it, you have to make it. I would take workshops here in the UK, in America. I did, you know, for instance, 6 months evening courses at Central St. Martin. I did loads of workshops, Santa Fe workshops in America, Brooks Academy in California. And it was just kind of nonstop, to be honest, one-on-one with certain photographers, and just kept perfecting the skill. I even enrolled for about 3 years on and off at a school in London called the School of Black and White Photography. And we did everything, really, including film. I mean, it was actually only film at the time. So developing my own photographs, my own prints in the darkroom was the best moment, as far as learning about light. You know, I always say, you know, especially in my black and whites, I like to say that I paint with light. And that's where I learned it. It was 3 years absorbing a lot of fumes and learning how to paint with light effectively. So yes, so educationally, it sort of happened after in life. And I used to use my kids as models for many years, and of course they hated me for it. Today they love me for it because they have very beautiful pictures of themselves. And then really the real opportunity was given to me by pure happenstance, where a friend of mine came exactly on the dot of 10 years ago to my home, and I'd just come back from New Mexico. In fact, I'd come back from doing a workshop in Santa Fe around George O'Keeffe's ranch. It was a figurative workshop in the desert, and I had these printed prints on the ground in my living room. And she looked at them and said, "Oh, how wonderful. Who have you bought?" And I said, No, I haven't bought any. This is my work." She goes, "What do you mean it's my work?" I said, "Well, I've been photographing kind of all my life." And she goes, "How come we've never known about it?" I said, "Well, I never dared, really." And so she snapped a few pictures and sent it to Tristan Hoare, who very, very graciously gave me my first show. And I owe him a lot. I really do.
How amazing.
And then really this was exactly 10 years ago. And then that's when my wings were unclipped and was forced into the public realm and into the public zone. And then just things followed, you know.
Yeah.
Once you're pushed, you know, literally kicked into it, you're like, okay, well, you know, a lot of artists go through life wishing for opportunities like this. I've been given this privilege. I'm going to grab it and run with it.
Definitely.
And I didn't really think very much because, you know, this happened quite late in my life. I was 47 at the time. And when you reach that sort of age and you kind of are starting a career at that level, at that age, you just say, well, you know, let's throw it up in the air. They either like it or they don't, but I'm having fun in the process.
For sure.
And you kind of trust in the force and trust in the process, basically.
Yeah. So prior to that, you were already an art collector.
Yeah.
Before starting doing this
Yeah.
as a career.
Yeah.
And working alongside, major institutions, museums.
Yeah.
How did that play into the role of you then becoming a photographer as a career?
I think in life, and this is really I share this wisdom or lesson with my own kids as well. And it doesn't have to apply to the creative industries. I think that you cannot and should not, in this day and age in particular, define yourself in any shape or form. And I think whatever curveballs are thrown at you, good or bad, you grab them and kind of twist them into something positive, if you can. And in my case, it's been a bit of a puzzle. I mean, if you can imagine laying out a puzzle on the table, I've gone through different cycles of my artistic kind of love of art, if you see what I mean. So life, I guess, with the arts. As you say, I've been involved with, at some stage, collecting, of course. And collecting, in my case, was very much engaging with the artists behind the works. Everything in my home is an engagement of some sort. It's a memory-based, relationship-based situation of a moment where I really enjoyed the artist because I met them, because I spoke to them, because I really digged what they said and what they were doing and the purpose of what they were doing. So there was that element. I wrote a few books, 5 or 6 books that have been published, mostly with Thames and Hudson, and really solely focused on the creative industries, on artists and their studios. So really, I kind of learned on the job. Even though I wasn't educated in the arts, I kind of educated myself through these conversations. Hundreds and hundreds of studio visits that I did over the years, over, something the first book I did was in 2010. So collaboration. It's always been teamwork, by the way. I would never say that they're my books. It was teamwork. Um, and 15 years of studio visits, you can just, adds up to a lot of studio visits, a lot of conversations, somewhere along the lines between my that kind of work, the collecting, and then institutional work. As you've said, I've been very closely associated with the Whitechapel Gallery, where I was, trustee for a while. I was also chairing Middle East Acquisition Committee at the Tate for about 10 years. So I had all these different fragments of the art world sort of, mishmashing in my head. Literally, I can't come up with the right word, but that's, some sort of soup was created in my brain. My brain absorbed all this information. And then at some stage, 10 years ago, there was an output, actually creative output from my side. And this is clearly a result of everything else that I did. All these conversations, education on the job, institutional work, seeing how museums work, how galleries work, understanding the commercial side of the business side of the art world. And it was a very, privileged position to be in when I started my career, because I had already had an into the whole scene, effectively. And not only in England, in America as well. Spent a lot of time. One of the books that we did, that we worked on and published with Thames and Hudson, was on American artists and their studios. And, we spent 7 weeks going around America, various studios, East Coast, West Coast, in between. And so all this kind of comes into play, these cultural differences, nuances, techniques, aesthetics, everything was some sort of mumbo jumbo in the head, and it came out in my own way, And research and reading, of course, goes without saying. I have people come to see my quote unquote studio, which is here at home, and they come in there and they're surprised because all they see is books. They don't really see, prints like hanging from. I'm very naughty. I use my associates' actual studios for that kind of thing. So I work with a wonderful, wonderful printer, Ted Chow Digital, who's just an amazing human. He will never let anything leave his studio without his last sort of perfection, magical touch, on my prints. He's been a fantastic collaborator. Roger Fawcett Tang of Structure, who's does all the designs of the books and exhibition catalogs, and these are real colleagues. So I use their studios. My own studio is just books and research and reading and every Tom, Dick, and Harry book on photography you can imagine, of course, in the genres that attract me. So I'm very inspired by the past history of photography, and everything that's going on today. So it's a lot of education, really, is what it is.
Did you find it hard at the beginning, because you're kind of known more, obviously at the start, as being more of a collector and someone who's involved in institutions? Did you find it hard at the beginning to be accepted as an artist?
100%. 100%, because I kind of was known for something on the other side of the equation.
Yes.
So when I finally decided, I'm going to take this leap.
And it's almost like the other side.
I jumped. Dare I say, the other side of the Chinese wall, or like
exactly,
or was that the wall to the wild side? I kind of didn't allow myself to think too much, because I knew that I could be subject to criticism. Now she thinks she's an artist, kind of thing. But I just did it. Sometimes in life, you just do it. You just jump in the abyss, and you hope that things work out. And it's about risk taking. It really is the only way I can talk about it. And I know a lot of people were questioning. I do, fully aware of it. And I still, to this day, even though it's been 10 years, I invite criticism. I'm always open to people's opinions. I mean, that's what the arts are all about anyway.
Definitely.
They're not objective. They're super subjective. And that's the beauty of it, I don't expect anyone to love my work, everyone. Some do, some don't, and hallelujah to that, But sometimes you just, got to do it. That's it.
Definitely.
And it took a few years. It definitely took a few years. It took, I think, a good 3-4 years for people to actually start believing in it. All I can tell you is today that I am living, breathing, eating, dreaming this thing. It's not amazing. Some sort of like, fabulous pastime. It's all I do. It's all you do. 100%, all day.
As a collector, has your angle towards collecting changed since becoming an artist?
I don't collect anymore.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Nothing at all?
Every now and again, yes.
Okay.
One piece that really
love,
touches my heart, or I meet an artist who really touches my heart, in the manner in which we exchange or ideas, or
Has your relationship with artists changed?
Yes, they've become. I'm part of them now.
Yeah. Do you feel like
I do.
Good.
And I'm finally accepted. I have a lot of requests for collaborations, which is wonderful. The best thing I have to tell you is when I get the thumbs up from young artists. And that to me says a lot, or from a young audience. It seems like some of my photographs speak well to youth. And I mean, really in the 20s and so forth, which kind of puts a smile on my face, which kind of, makes me think maybe I have something, that is attractive to the youth. And I think that's actually on many levels kind of more important to me than seasoned collectors. I mean, seasoned collectors is wonderful, and I am extremely grateful that I'm collected. I still have a hard time believing that I'm hanging in people's homes and people love living with me. I have a particularly wide American collector base. I don't know what it is about my work that speaks to Americans. I'm sort of everywhere from Texas to Palm Springs to Florida, Palm Beach, New York, of course, Austin, Houston. It's kind of funny. Aspen.
Interesting.
Yeah, really. Montana recently. The Hamptons. A lot. And I think maybe has to do with the locations in which I shoot, which I'm very attracted by the West itself. So there's a bit of Americana in my work.
Yes.
There's a bit of vintage kind of approach to my work, vintage romance, I call it. But also perhaps locations, in the south of France, in Provence, Capri, places like that where Americans tend to vacation,
yes,
and have some sort of like memory association, a positive memory association with that. So it's great. And, the American market, photographic market, is a big market. So it's a nice place to be appreciated, certainly.
And I suppose, because as you were saying, how, you're not ashamed of it. And if anything, you want to show real beauty.
Absolutely.
And I think Americans as well might be more open to that, and
Absolutely.
quite like having really beautiful things.
Totally. And I've also realized as an artist that something interesting that I've noticed even in my own practice, I always have or need to have this yin and yang of working on something quite intellectual, which can raise a lot of conversation. And, you know, like this American West project we're working on, there's a lot of intellectual conversation that can go with it, should you choose to do that. At the same time, I kind of like things a bit light as well. And I'm the first person to say that, some of my photographic series are just, kind of take them for face value. Maybe one should not necessarily be seeking deep intellectual, debates, French style kind of thing, on every image that one produces. Maybe the image is just a beautiful image, and perhaps that's just enough without delving further into it.
Yeah.
And to have this, play or this yo-yo thing in my own practice where I need a bit of that and a bit of this. It's like, people who pick up books and are multi-readers, effectively, reading 2-3 books at the same time. I kind of need to do that with my own practice. So it keeps me engaged, interested. And, on the American West project right now, I'm like knee deep as well in logistics, because this thing is going to be traveling to various locations. It's just so much logistics that you kind of forget to actually put your finger on that click, the camera. And so I need to do fast, fun, quick things where I have the opportunity to photograph at the same time. Because that's really my moment, my moment of solace and just, presence is pure zen is when I'm behind the camera. So if I lose that opportunity, then what's it all about, really? It can't just be all about commerce and intellect. It can't.
I was speaking to a photography collector literally on Monday, Louis Berwick, and he told me that his first piece he collected was a Herman Leonard.
Okay.
And he then met the artist a few years later. He did beautiful jazz shots.
Right.
And he met the artist a few years later, and he was like, "Oh, tell me about the work and the story behind it." He goes, "Honestly, I love jazz. I was in a jazz bar. I picked up my camera and took some photos,
and people
liked them.
That's
the story. There isn't more to it."
And sometimes, I love curators as well because they try to extricate more layers. It's like, an onion that you kind of peel and peel away, trying to get to the core of it. And, sometimes it's good to have that dialogue because they bring out things that you as an artist may have not even thought about, genuinely, because, your work is so intuitive. It's so immediate.
Yeah.
You don't think or overthink things,
I think that's the beauty of photography is its immediacy.
Yes, 100%.
It's in the moment.
It's
You're
in the
capturing
moment.
a moment in
Totally,
time.
Totally.
That's what's so
and that
special
moment, of course, has to be that right moment.
Yes. And you can't recreate it
exactly.
in a photograph.
Absolutely.
It's either that shot or it's done.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
This
Candice.
was such a wonderful conversation.
I'm so happy.
Thank
you.